The billionaire sneered and held up the bottle. "This wine costs more than your entire year's salary," he said. The waitress poured a tiny sip, swirled it, and tasted. In that single moment, her trained palate knew the truth. His $30,000 vintage was a cheap counterfeit. The room froze. A billionaire's humiliation was about to unfold, and the server who exposed him held a secret that would shatter the luxury wine world. Maria had once dreamed of becoming a master sommelier, but when her father's medical bills forced her to drop out of certification, she traded wine cellars for restaurant floors. That night, at one of the city's most exclusive steakhouses, she was just another invisible server, until the loudest patron in the room made her the center of a global scandal. What no one at that table knew was that Maria carried a skill most sommeliers spend a lifetime chasing. A palate so precise she could taste a wine's village of origin, its vintage, and its fraudulence in a single sip. Across the world, counterfeit wine is a $65 billion criminal enterprise, and up to 20% of all fine wines sold are fake. Maria was about to pull back the curtain on an underground empire, and her quiet act of defiance would make her both a hero and a target. Maria was born in a dusty vineyard town in Argentina's Mendoza province, where the Andes cast shadows over rows of Malbec vines. Her father, a field worker, taught her to taste grapes before she learned to read. By age 7, she could distinguish a Cabernet from a Merlot blindfolded. By 14, she was the unofficial quality tester for the local cooperative, her palate so sharp that winemakers called her La Niña Prodigio, the prodigy child. She dreamed of becoming a certified sommelier, of one day standing in the world's great cellars, but that dream had to cross an ocean first. When she was 19, her family immigrated to the United States, chasing the promise of better medicine for her father's failing heart. Maria enrolled in a sommelier certification program in New York, working nights as a dishwasher to afford the fees. She passed the introductory exam with the highest marks in her cohort, her instructors speaking of her future in whispers reserved for future masters. Then her father's health collapsed. The bills piled higher than insurance could cover. Maria withdrew from the program, her spot given to a student with far less talent but parents who could pay. She took a job as a waitress, shoving her wine notes into a cardboard box beneath her bed, believing the door to her dream had slammed shut for good. But her palate never rested. On Mondays, when high-end restaurants were closed, she would travel to wine shops that offered free tastings. She would stand for an hour, sniffing, swirling, spitting, cataloging every note. She built a mental library of thousands of wines, the minerality of Chablis, the leather of Old Barolo, the violet lift of a perfectly aged Cab Franc. Her gift grew sharper, even as her uniform stayed the same black vest and white apron. The restaurant where she worked was called Ebony Prime, a steakhouse in downtown Chicago that catered to a clientele for whom money was an afterthought. The dining room glowed with amber sconces, mahogany banquettes, and a wine tower that rose 2 stories behind bulletproof glass. The wine list was thicker than a Bible, pages of Burgundies and Bordeauxs with price tags that could pay off a mortgage. The head sommelier, a slender Frenchman named Laurent, was a legitimate expert who treated the list like a personal fiefdom. The waitstaff were forbidden to discuss wine with guests beyond the house recommendations. Maria was invisible, a tray-carrying ghost, refilling water glasses and clearing crumbs while Laurent performed his ritual presentations. She watched him sometimes, a bittersweet ache in her chest. She knew she could do his job. She knew she could do it better. But she kept her head down, because speaking up meant risking the steady paycheck that kept her father's medications flowing. Then came the night of December 12th, a frigid Friday when the reservation book filled with names the staff recognized from Forbes covers. The party of 8 arrived at 7:45, led by a man named Marcus Eldridge. He was a real estate developer whose face appeared on billboards, a self-made titan who had clawed his way from a Brooklyn tenement to a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. He was also, as the servers whispered, a tyrant. He made hostesses cry, sent back dishes over imperceptible floors, and tipped poorly unless he was performing for investors. That night, he wore a bespoke charcoal suit, and a gold watch heavy enough to anchor a small boat. His guests included 2 Japanese businessmen, a pair of venture capitalists, and a woman dressed in Valentino who laughed too loudly at everything Marcus said. As soon as they were seated, Marcus snapped his fingers at Maria. "Bring me the list, the real list." He meant the reserve list, the pages of rare vintages kept off the main menu. Maria retrieved it and handed it to him without meeting his eyes. He flipped through it with theatrical slowness, letting his guests lean in. "This," he announced, jabbing a thick finger at one entry, "is the one. A waitress 1961, 100,000, no wait." He squinted at the menu with deliberate pause. "Just 30,000, that's pocket change, less than she makes all year." He aimed a thumb at Maria without looking up, a dismissal so casual it felt like a flick of ash. The table chuckled. Maria did not flinch. She had absorbed worse. Laurent was not on duty. His assistant, a young man named Tyler, was the acting sommelier, but Tyler had already admitted he had never opened a bottle priced above 5 figures. His hands shook as he retrieved the waitress from the cellar, a dark bottle cradled in a velvet sleeve. Marcus demanded the bottle be opened immediately, no ceremony, just pour. Maria was called to hold the decanter. Tyler pulled the cork. It came out too easily, the spongy end crumbling slightly. Maria noticed the cork was barely 40 millimeters long. High-end wines typically use corks 52 to 55 millimeters, extra length to preserve the wine over decades. The short cork was alarm bell number 1. She kept her expression neutral. Then came the label. Under the candlelight, the gold lettering showed microbleeding at the edges, the hallmark of a home inkjet printer rather than the traditional plate press that authentic labels used. Alarm bell number 2. But she was only a server. Speaking up now, in front of a man who had already humiliated her, would be professional suicide. As the wine glugged into the crystal decanter, its color caught her eye, a vivid, almost purple garnet rim, far too youthful for a wine that had spent 60-plus years in bottle. An old waitress should show brick-orange hues at the edge, signs of slow oxidation. Alarm bell 3. Now it was time for the ceremonial taste. Usually a sommelier takes a small sip to confirm soundness. Tyler, visibly nervous, filled a glass and slid it toward Maria. "You check it," he whispered, his confidence completely evaporated. Maria picked up the glass. She tilted it against the light, then swirled. The nose hit her, candied cherries, vanilla extract, and a whiff of nail polish remover, volatile acidity. A cheap modern Merlot blend, amped up with sugar and a splash of something industrial. She put the glass to her lips and let a few drops coat her tongue. Instantly, her mind cross-referenced thousands of taste memories. This was not waitress. This was barely a $10 grocery store wine. It was a fake. Marcus was watching. "Well, are you going to stand there sniffing all night?" "Pour." Maria placed the glass down. She knew that the man seated before her could destroy her career with a single phone call. She also knew that what she was about to say would humiliate him in front of his guests, his investors, his entire world. She drew a slow breath and spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "Sir, I'm sorry, this wine is counterfeit." The laughter at the table died like a snuffed candle. Marcus's face shifted through several shades of red, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles twitched. "What did you say to me?" His voice was a blade. In the kitchen doorway, the head chef froze. Tyler looked as if he might faint. Maria's heart pounded, but she did not drop her gaze. She began to explain the cork, the label, the color, the unmistakable taste of fraud, but Marcus slammed his palm on the table. "You," he growled, "are a waitress. You clean plates for minimum wage. You have no idea what you're talking about." He turned to Tyler. "Get your manager, now. This woman has insulted me and my guests." The entire restaurant was watching now, forks paused midair, the clink of glasses hushed. Maria stood alone at the center of a storm, knowing that everything she had kept hidden was about to come crashing into the open, and that once the real truth came out, she would be the one who had to face what lurked behind that bottle, an operation that had already destroyed lives and would not hesitate to destroy hers. The manager, a polished man named Victor Hale, arrived at the table within 90 seconds, his smile a carefully measured diplomatic tool. He had managed Ebony Prime for 14 years and had navigated every species of wealthy outrage. The steak cooked 1 degree past medium rare, the ice cube that melted too fast, the bill that dared to reflect reality. But he had never, in nearly a decade and a half, heard a waitress accuse a guest of serving counterfeit wine. He assessed the scene, Marcus Eldridge still vibrating with fury, the guests exchanging uneasy glances, Tyler pale and useless, and Maria, calm, upright, her eyes carrying something Victor could not quite identify. It looked improbably like certainty. "Mr. Eldridge," Victor said, his tone low and soothing, "let me escort you and your guests to our private dining room. We will resolve this immediately and discreetly." The move worked. Marcus, unwilling to be a spectacle a moment longer, allowed himself to be redirected. As the party filed into the soundproofed back room, Victor caught Maria by the elbow. "Stay here, don't say a word to anyone." In the private room, the temperature felt 10 degrees colder. Marcus paced, his voice a low growl. "I want that woman fired, tonight, and I want a full refund for that bottle and the entire meal." Victor nodded, placating, and sent for the restaurant's backup sommelier, Laurent, who had been home with a cold but arrived in under 20 minutes, scarf still wrapped around his throat. Laurent was a man of precise rituals. He removed his coat, washed his hands, and approached the decanter as if approaching an altar. He poured a small measure into a fresh glass, tilted it, inhaled, and then froze. The entire room watched his face shift from professional calm to something far more alarming: shock. He tasted, he set the glass down and turned not to Marcus but to Victor. "This is not Petrus, this is not even Bordeaux. This is a cheap, manipulated Merlot, likely from bulk California juice, spiked with sugar and acidity to mimic age." His voice was flat, factual, and deadly. "We have been defrauded." Marcus stopped packing. The arrogance drained from his face, replaced by something he rarely felt: humiliation mixed with dawning confusion. He had publicly mocked a woman who had just saved him from pouring $100,000 of investor goodwill down the drain. In corporate terms, Maria had just done him an enormous favor. In human terms, he had humiliated her in front of a room full of strangers. He sank into a chair and muttered, "Who else knows how to pull this off?" The question would echo far beyond that room. Because what Victor and Laurent uncovered over the next 48 hours would expose a fraud network that stretched from Chicago to Hong Kong, a network that had been operating for years, funneling counterfeit bottles into the most respected cellars in America, and whose architects would not hesitate to destroy anyone who got too close. What no one yet realized was that Ebony Prime had been targeted deliberately, and that the bottle of Petrus was not a random fake. It was a test, a probe designed to see how easily the establishment could be penetrated. Maria had just pulled a single thread, and now the whole fabric was about to unravel. Laurent and Victor began tracing the bottle's provenance that very night. The restaurant's records showed the Petrus had been purchased 6 months earlier through a distributor called Global Fine Wine Sourcing, a company that had supplied several other high-profile Chicago restaurants. The owner of GFWS, a man named Dmitry Volkov, was a Ukrainian immigrant with an office in a nondescript industrial park near O'Hare. On paper, he was legitimate, licensed, insured, references from restaurants that swore by his service. But when Laurent called a contact at a New York auction house to verify the bottle's serial number, something that should have been done before the wine ever entered Ebony Prime's cellar, the answer came back 3 hours later. The serial number belonged to a bottle of Petrus 1961 that had been sold at a Hong Kong auction in 2015 to a private collector in Singapore. That bottle had never left Asia. The one sitting in Ebony Prime's decanter was a ghost. At the heart of the counterfeit wine world is a simple, brutal economics lesson. The rarer the wine, the easier it is to fake, because almost no one alive has ever tasted a genuine bottle to compare. The most faked labels in history: 1945 Mouton Rothschild, pre-1980 Romanée Conti, Petrus from legendary vintages like 61 and 47, sell for tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars per bottle. A counterfeiter can buy an empty original bottle for $200, fill it with a $20 supermarket red, carefully replace the capsule, and sell it for $30,000. The profit margin is not merely high, it is criminal insanity, an invitation to exploit the egos of the ultra-rich who collect trophy wines they will never open. By some estimates, 20% of all fine wine currently trading on the secondary market is fake. That means 1 in every 5 bottles sitting in the private cellars of billionaires across the globe is a lie. And the network that Victor and Laurent had stumbled upon was one of the most sophisticated pieces of that lie. Maria, meanwhile, was sent home. Victor told her to take a few days off with pay while the restaurant handled the situation. He did not fire her. He was not a fool. He knew that if the story leaked, firing the whistleblower would be a public relations disaster. Instead, he thanked her quietly at the back door, his handshake firmer than she expected. But Maria walked to the train station with a knot in her stomach that had nothing to do with job security. She knew too much. The label, the cork, the color, these were not subtle clues. A counterfeiter with even moderate skill would have gotten the cork right, would have used a plate press reproduction, would have aged the wine's rim to a proper tawny hue. The fake she had tasted was almost crude, as if designed to be caught. And that meant one of two things: either the counterfeiter was dangerously incompetent, or someone wanted the fake to be discovered. A test, a warning, or a trap. When Maria arrived at her small apartment in Logan Square, she found a manila envelope slipped under her door. No postage, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message: "Nice palette, stay out of our cellar." No signature, no threat. Just 5 words that turned her blood cold. The counterfeiters knew who she was, they knew where she lived, and they were watching. The next morning, the story broke in the Chicago Tribune. A reporter named David Kim had gotten a tip from a busboy who'd overheard the confrontation between Maria and Marcus. The headline read, "Waitress humiliates billionaire, uncovers counterfeit wine scandal at elite steakhouse." The article named Maria, quoted anonymous staff, and speculated about the shadowy world of wine fraud that had infected even the most trusted establishments. By noon, the story had been picked up by national outlets. Maria's phone buzzed non-stop. CNN wanted an interview. The New York Times wanted comment. A lawyer from Ebony Prime called to advise her not to speak publicly without the restaurant's consent. And Marcus Eldridge, the man who had called her worthless hours earlier, left a voicemail that she replayed 3 times. "Ms. Hassan, I mean Maria, I am sorry, I was out of line. Please call me, I want to make this right." But making things right was about to become far more complicated. The FBI's Art Crime Division, which handles high-value wine fraud cases, had opened a file on global fine wine sourcing 6 months earlier, acting on a tip from an auction house that had spotted evidence of label forgery on multiple bottles traced back to Volkov's operation. So far, they had only circumstantial evidence: irregular label printing, fill levels inconsistent with bottle age, a handful of serial numbers that didn't match producer records. They needed an insider. They needed someone who had tasted the fakes and could testify in court about precisely what made them fraudulent, someone with the palate of a master sommelier but no professional credential to protect. They needed Maria. Agent Rebecca Torres of the FBI's Chicago field office arrived at Maria's apartment 2 days later, accompanied by Laurent, who had agreed to serve as a liaison. Torres was a brisk, no-nonsense woman in her 40s who had spent the last decade chasing art thieves and antiquities looters. Wine fraud, she explained, was the natural next frontier. High-value wine had become a parallel currency among global criminal networks, impossible to track, easy to move, and as unregulated as a garage sale. Torres showed Maria photos of bottles seized from a warehouse in New Jersey. Chateau Lafite with labels printed on modern paper, Margaux bottles with capsules showing tool marks inconsistent with original bottling, and most damning of all, a magnum of 1947 Cheval Blanc with a recyclable symbol embossed on the glass, something that did not exist in 1947. "We have a mountain of evidence," Torres said, "but we need a human instrument, someone who can walk a jury through the sensory proof. How did you know the waitress was fake? What exactly did you taste, smell, see? If you testify, you could help us dismantle a $65 billion criminal enterprise." Maria stared at the photos. She was being offered a chance to do more than wait tables, more than earn a sommelier certificate. more than she had ever dared imagine. But the note under her door flashed in her mind. She asked Tors, "What about my family? My father is sick. My mother is alone." Tors' face tightened. She admitted that the Bureau could offer protection but could not guarantee safety. Organized wine fraud rings had been linked to Eastern European syndicates with a long reach and a short temper. Witnesses had been intimidated. One wine collector in Miami who cooperated with investigators had been found beaten in his garage. The threat was real. Yet as Maria sat in her cramped living room, surrounded by the evidence of her invisible life, the box of wine notes, the photographs of her father, the stack of hospital bills, she felt something shift. She had been invisible for 7 years, ignored, underestimated, a pair of hands that brought bread and cleared plates. The world had told her she was not enough, not educated enough, not wealthy enough, not powerful enough. But in that single sip at Ebony Prime, she had proven that her knowledge was worth more than the entire contents of a billionaire's wine cellar. To retreat now, to stay silent while the fraudsters who had threatened her continued to poison the industry she loved, would be to accept the very invisibility they had forced upon her. Maria looked Agent Tors in the eye and said, "I'll do it, but I want something in return." What Maria wanted was simple. She demanded that Marcus Eldridge, the man who had humiliated her, make a public apology and fund a full sommelier scholarship program for restaurant workers who could not afford certification. Tors, taken aback, promised she would relay the request. Within 24 hours, Marcus Eldridge held a press conference. Standing at a podium with the Ebony Prime logo behind him, his skin still flushed with embarrassment, he read a prepared statement. "I apologize unreservedly to Maria Hassan for my words and actions. She demonstrated expertise and courage under extreme pressure, and I only hope she will allow me to support her future in the wine industry. Effective immediately, I am establishing the Maria Hassan Scholarship Fund, endowed with $2 million to help aspiring sommeliers from disadvantaged backgrounds achieve their dreams." It was a masterful reputational maneuver, but it was also, by all accounts, sincere. Maria watched the press conference on her phone, tears streaming silently down her face. She had not only won, she had changed the rules of the game, but the battle was only beginning. The FBI operation against Volkov's network required Maria to go undercover, a terrifying prospect for a woman who had never even acted in a school play. The plan was audacious. Maria would pose as a wealthy collector, built up through a fabricated backstory, and attend a private tasting organized by Volkov's associates in Miami. There she would use her palate to identify which wines were counterfeit, gathering real-time evidence that would allow agents to execute simultaneous raids on Volkov's warehouses in 3 states. If she succeeded, the takedown would be the largest counterfeit wine bust in US history. If she failed, the network would scatter, and the people who had slipped a note under her door would know exactly who had turned against them. Laurent would be her handler, accompanying her to the tasting as her sommelier consultant. Agent Tors would be listening through a wire, and Maria would have to do what she had done her entire life: trust her palate, keep her head down, and survive in a room full of people who believed she did not belong. Except this time, the room wouldn't be full of dismissive billionaires. It would be full of criminals who had spent decades perfecting the art of deception and who would kill to protect their secrets. As Maria boarded the plane to Miami, she gripped the armrests and thought of her grandmother in Mendoza, of those dusty rows of Malbec where she had first learned that truth could be tasted. The plane lifted off, and Maria knew there was no turning back. The taste of a single fake wine had led her here. Now, she would use that taste to burn down an empire. The Miami tasting was held at a private villa on Star Island, a white marble palace rented through a shell company that the FBI had traced to a holding trust in the Cayman Islands. The address oozed exclusivity. Guests arrived via a private bridge gate, their identities checked by armed security, their phones confiscated at the door. The ostensible host was a reclusive Austrian collector named Klaus Riener, but Klaus Riener did not exist. He was a fiction built by the FBI over 3 months, verified social media accounts, a fabricated auction house purchase history, a fake Forbes article mentioning his passion for rare burgundy. Maria stepped out of a black SUV dressed in a cream-colored pantsuit and a string of borrowed pearls, her hair swept into an elegant chignon. Laurent walked 2 paces behind her, playing the role of her trusted sommelier. Agent Tours was parked in an unmarked surveillance van 2 blocks away, listening through a microphone hidden in Maria's brooch. Inside, the villa glittered with nouveau-riche excess. A chandelier shaped like a waterfall, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Biscayne Bay skyline, and a 12-seat tasting table laid with crystal decanters and white linen. The other guests, 6 men and 2 women, were a mix of private collectors, restaurant buyers, and a man introduced as Mr. Chen, a Hong Kong-based investor whose eyes tracked Maria with unnerving calm. Dmitry Volkov himself was not present. His lieutenant, a barrel-chested man named Sergei Orlov, presided over the evening with a salesman's smile and the dead eyes of a man who had hurt people. The wines were arrayed on a sideboard like museum pieces: a magnum of 1945 Mouton Rothschild, a horizontal lineup of 8 vintages of Romanée Conti, and a dusty bottle of 1870 Lafite that Orlov claimed had been liberated from a French chateau during the Second World War. As the first wine was poured, a 1961 Chateau Latour, Maria's training took over. She lifted the glass and tilted it against the light. The rim was brick orange, properly aged, but the core showed an unnatural dark ruby that suggested blending with a younger wine. She inhaled cedar tobacco, but also a faint medicinal note that belonged to volatile acidity, masked by a heavy dose of new oak extract. She tasted, the liquid coating her tongue like a confession. The tannins were powdery and synthetic, not the resolved, silky grip of a genuinely aged Pauillac. She gave a subtle nod toward Laurent, their prearranged signal for fake. The mic caught a low cough from Tours, evidence logged. Wine after wine, Maria's palate dissected the table like a scalpel. The 1945 Mouton carried a label printed with digital offset, the telltale absence of plate press impression she had learned to spot in textbooks. The 1999 Romanée Conti had a capsule with tool marks inconsistent with the domain's hand-waxing technique. The 1870 Lafite was so absurd that she nearly laughed. The glass bore a recyclable symbol, and the cork, when Orlov pulled it, was 50 millimeters, 3 millimeters too short, and suspiciously elastic for a wine that should have crumbled into dust after a century and a half. Each silent confirmation felt like a stone added to a growing avalanche. The FBI had expected perhaps a third of the wines to be fake. By the 10th pour, Maria had identified 8 counterfeits and 2 bottles so expertly manipulated that even she was uncertain. This was not a small operation. It was a factory. Then came the moment that cracked everything open. Orlov gestured to an assistant, who brought forward a wooden case with a brass plaque reading Waitress 1961. Maria's heart hammered. The assistant opened the case, revealing a bottle with a label that matched the one she had seen at Ebony Prime down to the microscopic bleeding of the gold font. This was the same batch, the same hand. Orlov smiled and said, "A special gift for our newest collector. We understand you had a little incident in Chicago. Some uneducated waitress made a fool of a billionaire. But here, we only deal in the genuine article." He poured a glass and slid it toward her. Every eye in the room fixed on Maria. They were testing her. If she accepted the wine as authentic, they would know she was a fraud. If she called it out, she risked blowing her cover with a roomful of criminals who had no qualms about violence. Maria took the glass and brought it to her lips. The room held its breath. She tasted the same candied cherries, the same artificial vanilla, the same telltale nail polish finish. She set the glass down and looked directly at Orlov. "I'm afraid this is the same forgery that embarrassed Mr. Eldridge. You're serving me a counterfeit and calling it a gift. In Austria, that would be considered an insult." Her voice was ice. Orlov's smile faltered, but then he laughed, a short, barking sound, and clapped his hands. "Your reputation is well-deserved, Madame Rioneur. I apologize. Let me bring you something truly special from our reserve." He was smooth, but Maria saw the flicker of calculation behind his eyes. She had passed the test. and she had just provided the FBI with the final link tying the Miami operation to the Chicago counterfeit. The trap was set. But then, as the evening wound down, Mr. Chen approached her on the veranda. The Miami night was humid, the air thick with salt and jasmine. He stood uncomfortably close, his voice a whisper. "You have an extraordinary palate. So extraordinary that I wonder, are you really here to buy, or are you here to taste for someone else?" Maria's blood turned to ice. Before she could respond, Chen continued. "We know about the wire, we know about the surveillance van, and we know your real name, Maria Hassan. The question now is whether you walk out of here alive, or whether you disappear like the others who got too close." In the van, Tors was already ordering her team to move in. The plan had been to let Maria and Laurent exit before the raid, to protect them from the violence of an armed takedown. But Chen had blown that timeline. Over the earpiece, Tor's voice cut through the static. "Maria, get out of there now, walk to the front gate. Backup is 2 minutes out." But Chen's hand clamped onto Maria's wrist. "I don't think you're going anywhere," he said. "Not until you tell us who else is involved." What Chen did not know was that Laurent had seen the exchange and moved with a speed that belied his years of sommelier grace. He stepped onto the veranda, a bottle of champagne in his hand, and announced loudly, "Madame Rioneur. I've been looking for you. Our host insists we toast before you leave." He wedged himself between Maria and Chen, popping the cork with a professional flourish. The momentary distraction was all Maria needed. She slipped away, heels clacking on the marble floor, through the villa's great room, past the armed guards who had not yet been alerted, out the front door, and into the humid darkness. Behind her she heard shouts, then the unmistakable crack of a taser, then the roar of FBI agents storming the gate. She did not look back. The raid on the Star Island villa resulted in 13 arrests, including Sergei Orlov and Mr. Chen, whose real name, as Tors would later reveal, was Zhang Wei, an Interpol Red Notice fugitive wanted for art theft, money laundering, and most chillingly, the murder of a wine collector in Hong Kong who had threatened to expose his counterfeiting ring. The operation seized over 400 bottles of counterfeit wine, with an estimated street value of $30 million, along with computers containing transaction records that implicated restaurateurs, auction house insiders, and a retired wine critic who had accepted bribes to authenticate fakes. In a warehouse raid coordinated simultaneously in New Jersey, agents found a complete counterfeiting lab. Industrial printers, stacks of old labels, barrels of cheap bulk wine, and a library of genuine corks and capsules harvested from empty bottles bought on the black market. The mastermind, Dmitry Volkov, was apprehended at O'Hare Airport, attempting to board a flight to Moscow with a suitcase containing a single, genuine bottle of 1947 Cheval Blanc, perhaps the only real wine he had ever owned. But the story did not end with the arrests. As the FBI sifted through the network's financial records, they uncovered a layer of the operation that dwarfed even wine fraud. The counterfeit wine network was a front for something far more dangerous, a money laundering pipeline that funneled proceeds from Eastern European arms trafficking through high-end collectible markets. The rare wine bottles were not just fakes sold to rich collectors. They were vehicles to wash dirty money, converting illegal cash into untraceable assets that could be resold at auction, their fraudulent nature hidden by the very opacity of the fine wine trade. The $65 billion counterfeit wine industry was, in some corners, literally funding wars. Maria, who had tasted her way into a global conspiracy, suddenly understood the true cost of that single sip in Chicago. She had not just exposed a scam. She had disrupted an entire criminal economy. The press coverage was relentless. Maria's face appeared on every news channel, her story retold with the kind of myth-making that transforms ordinary people into legends. Her quiet dignity, her refusal to back down, her improbable journey from dishwasher to undercover operative, it all captured the public imagination. Marcus Eldridge, true to his word, had already funded the Maria Hassan Scholarship Fund. Applications poured in from restaurant workers across the country, people who had shelved their dreams for the same reasons Maria had, who now saw a path forward. Laurent became a regular commentator on wine fraud for major networks. his French accent lending an air of authority to the ongoing crackdown. Ebony Prime emerged from the scandal with its reputation intact and its wine verification protocols completely overhauled. And Maria, she finally completed her sommelier certification, not through the scholarship fund she had inspired, but by studying at night while working as a consultant for the FBI's newly formed wine fraud task force. The same palate that had once been dismissed as the talent of just a waitress was now a weapon of law enforcement, used to train agents and authenticate collections for museums and courts. Her father, whose health had stabilized, watched her graduation ceremony from a wheelchair, tears streaming down his weathered face. She had not only proven the billionaires wrong, she had proven the world wrong. But the final twist, the one that would send shockwaves through the industry, came 6 months later. While analyzing data from the seized computers, Maria noticed a pattern that no one else had seen. A consistent error in the counterfeiting lab's label-lagging technique that could be traced back to a single supplier of synthetic adhesive. That supplier had shipped materials to 7 other operations around the globe, each one now flagged for investigation. The network was not a single criminal enterprise. It was an ecosystem, sprawling across continents, larger and more deeply embedded than anyone had imagined. And at the center of it all, a quiet, fierce woman from Mendoza who had once been told she didn't belong now stood as the world's most unlikely and most effective defender of the truth in the bottle. The following 18 months reshaped the global wine industry in ways no one could have predicted. Maria became a fixture at FBI field offices, not as a paid informant, but as a consultant whose tasting notes were entered as court evidence. The trial of Dmitry Volkov, conducted in a federal courtroom in Chicago, featured a moment that would become legendary in wine circles. The defense attorney challenged Maria's qualifications by handing her a black glass and asking her to identify the wine inside. She took one sniff, didn't even taste it, and said, "A 1997 Brunello di Montalcino from the Il Marinito vineyard, slightly reduced from a faulty cork, but still sound." The courtroom gasped. The wine had been selected by the defense precisely because it was obscure and had a known flaw. They had expected her to fail. Instead, the judge leaned into his microphone and said, "I think the witness's expertise has been established." Volkov was sentenced to 22 years without parole, and Zhang Wei, the man who had grabbed her wrist in Miami, received life for his proven connections to 3 murders. All of turned state's evidence, providing testimony that led to 7 more arrests across Europe and Asia. The counterfeit wine network was not merely crippled, its entire infrastructure was mapped, exposed, and dismantled. For Ebony Prime, the scandal became a strange gift. Victor Hale instituted a stringent authentication protocol now known as the Maria Standard. Every bottle priced above $5,000 must be verified by a certified sommelier using ultraviolet light analysis, cork measurement, label plate inspection, and a tasting panel. The restaurant became a destination for wealthy clients who wanted assurance that their trophy wines were real, and its revenue increased 40% in the following year. Laurent became the chief sommelier of a new task force consultancy that advised auction houses and private collectors, a role that made him one of the most respected figures in the industry. Tyler, the trembling assistant who had faltered that night, enrolled in Maria's scholarship program and would later become the sommelier at a Michelin-starred restaurant in San Francisco, always crediting her with teaching him that courage is learnable. But the deepest transformation was Maria's own. Her father received the advanced cardiac treatment that had always been out of reach, funded not by charity, but by Maria's consulting income and a generous settlement from a lawsuit the FBI helped facilitate against Global Fine Wine Sourcing's insurance. She watched him take his first unassisted walk in years on a sunny morning in a Chicago park, the skyline rising behind them like a monument to endurance. She no longer carried the weight of financial desperation. She carried instead a sense of purpose that sharpened into a mission, to ensure that no one with her gift would ever have to choose between family and vocation again. The Maria Hassan Scholarship Fund, bankrolled initially by Marcus Eldridge's $2 million, had grown through public donations to over 20 million. Its first cohort of 15 scholars included dishwashers from Queens, line cooks from Houston, and a single mother from Detroit who had spent 12 years working coat check at a hotel while memorizing wine books in the break room. Maria personally mentored each recipient, her own story a living proof that pedigree could be forged, not just inherited. At a ceremony held at the James Beard House, she stood before the scholars and said, "I was invisible because the world doesn't know how to see value that doesn't wear a suit. You are not invisible anymore. Neither is the work you will do." Journalists covering the event noted that many of the city's most powerful restaurant owners sat in the audience, listening with a humility that hadn't been present in the industry for decades. Then came the revelation that rewrote everything. While training new FBI recruits on wine authentication techniques, Maria was sorting through the seized counterfeiting lab's archives when she noticed a recurring ingredient in the chemical analysis reports, a compound called laurel extract, used by the counterfeiters to age their fake labels artificially and give the paper an authentic yellowed patina. The compound was rare, derived from a species of laurel that grew almost exclusively in the Andean foothills of Argentina. Maria froze. Her grandmother had used that same laurel extract as a folk remedy, infusing it into cloths to wrap around wounds and preserve food. The counterfeiters had been sourcing this key ingredient from a small village just 15 kilometers from where Maria grew up, purchasing it from a cooperative that had no idea its traditional product was being used for crime. The connection was both stunning and deeply personal. The same hills that had shaped Maria's palate had also provided the tools that the counterfeiters used to deceive the world. It was as if fate had woven her life into the fabric of both the crime and its solution. This discovery led Maria back to Mendoza, to the dusty streets of her childhood, where she was greeted not as a former waitress, but as a prodigal hero. The local winemakers, many of whom remembered her as the little girl who tasted grapes, asked her to help them establish a certification system that would protect their wines from counterfeiters abroad. She walked the vineyard rows with her father, who, for the first time, could stand among the vines without pain, and she felt the circle of her life closing with a symmetry that felt sacred. She bought a small plot of land adjacent to her grandmother's old house and began planting a vineyard of her own, a project she called Raise, root dedicated to growing Malbec with the same meticulous attention to truth she had brought to tasting. The global wine world took notice. At the World Wine Symposium in Bordeaux, Maria was invited to deliver the keynote address, a platform normally reserved for billionaire vintners and famous critics. She walked onto the stage in a simple black dress, no pearls, no pretense. The audience of 2,000 included the very people who had once dismissed the idea that a waitress could know anything about fine wine. She began not with statistics or polemics, but with a story about her grandmother's hands, cracked from labor, gentle as prayer, passing down a tradition of discernment that knew no class boundaries. She described the taste of the counterfeit waitress that had started it all, how it had been an insult not just to the wine, but to the people who made real wine with their lives and their land. And then she revealed the final irony, that the laurel extract from her own homeland had been used to create the fakes, a bitter gift that had brought her face to face with her purpose. The applause that followed was not the polite clapping of ceremony, but a sustained roar of recognition. In that moment, Maria Hassan became something more than a sommelier or a consultant or a symbol. She became the conscience of an industry that had lost its way, a reminder that authenticity cannot be bought, it can only be lived. And as she stepped away from the podium, she was already planning her next move, a global accreditation network that would make wine fraud obsolete, built on the principle she had proved in a single sip on a cold Chicago night. The billionaire who had mocked her sat in the third row, and when she caught his eye, he nodded, his expression filled with a respect that no money could ever purchase. The waitress who had once been invisible had become the most trusted voice in wine, and the story, she knew, was still just beginning. Maria Hassan had proven something the wine world spent centuries denying, that the most valuable asset in a cellar is not the price tag on a bottle, but the integrity of the person who opens it. Her story rippled outward long after the headlines faded, reshaping how the industry thinks about expertise, access, and truth. Auction houses that once operated on handshake trust now employ teams of forensic analysts, many trained by Maria herself. Restaurants from London to Tokyo adopted authentication protocols modeled on the Maria standard, a quiet revolution that turned sommeliers into guardians rather than mere salespeople. And in the back rooms of private collectors' mansions, a nervous reckoning began as owners realized that the trophy wines they had displayed for decades might be elaborate fictions. But the most profound shift was not institutional, it was cultural. Maria had broken the myth that fine wine belongs only to the wealthy. Her face, her story, her unabashed expertise reminded the world that discernment is not a luxury product. It is a human capacity, available to anyone willing to study, to taste, to remember, to care. Across the country, restaurant workers who had shelved their dreams watched her rise and thought, "That could be me." Applications to sommelier programs surged by 60% in the year after the trial. Culinary schools began offering scholarships explicitly for candidates from service industry backgrounds. The Maria Hassan Scholarship Fund had started as a gesture of atonement from a humbled billionaire. It became a movement, seeding the next generation of wine professionals with a radical idea that the finest palate in the room might belong to the person filling your water glass. The global counterfeit wine trade was not fully eradicated, criminals adapt, and the appetite for trophy wines remains insatiable. But the network Maria dismantled had been the spine of the operation, and its collapse sent shockwaves through the black market. Interpol coordinated raids in 12 countries based on the data Maria helped extract from the seized computers. 14 additional arrests were made in the following year, including a prominent wine critic who had authenticated fakes for a fee and a respected negotiant in Bordeaux who had been laundering counterfeits through legitimate auction channels. The industry, which had long treated wine fraud as an embarrassing secret, finally began to confront it as the systemic crisis it is. Maria herself returned to Chicago, but not to the cramped Logan Square apartment with the rattling radiator. She bought a modest home near her parents, with a small garden where she planted Malbec vines imported from Mendoza. She continued consulting for the FBI, but on her own terms, carving out time for the mentorship program that had become her deepest joy. Her father, whose health had been a constant source of dread, lived to see her receive an honorary doctorate from the University of California, Davis, the world's premier viticulture program. Standing at the podium, she told the graduates, "You are all carrying a gift. Some of you know what it is already. Some of you will discover it under pressure in a moment when you are underestimated. Treasure it, hone it, and never let anyone tell you that you do not belong." The lingering question, the one that haunts every sommelier, every collector, every restaurateur who lived through this story, is not whether Maria Hassan will be remembered. She is already legendary. The question is, how many other Marias are still out there, hidden in plain sight, their talents buried under bills and uniforms and the weight of being unseen? How many brilliant palates are clearing tables tonight, pouring coffee, scrubbing dishes, waiting for a moment that might never come? The story of Maria Hassan is not just about one woman's triumph. It is a challenge to every system that equates value with wealth, that mistakes pedigree for ability, that looks past the person holding the tray. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that knowledge and courage can live anywhere, then please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear that their gift matters, and subscribe to this channel for more incredible true stories of ordinary people who changed the world. Your support helps us continue telling stories that deserve to be heard. Tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what hidden talent have you been keeping to yourself? Remember, you can buy the rarest wine, the most exquisite cork, the oldest label. You can buy the applause of a crowded room, but you cannot buy the taste of truth, and you cannot buy the courage to speak it when the whole world is listening.